Explaining the First Sino-Japanese War. In the 19th century, multiple wars and rebellions in China threw the Qing dynasty into chaos. Meanwhile, in Japan, through the Meiji Restoration, both the technology and its army were improved upon, and, looking for resources, Japan wished to expand. After taking over some islands, they would decide to expand into the Korean peninsula. However, the isolationist Joseon dynasty of Korea had been a Chinese tributary state for centuries. Despite this, in the 1860s and 70s, the United States and France would attempt to open up Korea to trade. However, Japan would be the one that succeeded. In 1875, the Japanese would militarily force the Koreans to sign the Treaty of Ganghwa, which would open up Korean ports to Japanese traders, and would theoretically end Chinese suzerainty over Korea. Hoping to gain influence in the region, both the Qing and the Japanese would send troops into the region, especially after the Japanese legations in Seoul had been attacked in 1882. However, the Imo incident, as it is known today, would end peacefully after the Treaty of Chimolpo. In 1884, the Chinese would be called in to help crush the Gapsin coup, led by pro-Japanese Korean reformers. Following this, both the Qing and the Japanese would agree to withdraw all their troops from Korea during the Tianjin Convention. However, tensions would remain high as Japanese people rioted against a Chinese ship in Nagasaki, and a pro-Japanese Korean, Kim Ok-yun, would be assassinated while in Shanghai. In 1894, the Chinese would once again be called in to crush the Donghak Rebellion. However, the Japanese would state that this broke the Tianjin Convention, and so the Japanese would send in their own troops. After the rebellion was over, the Japanese would attempt to reform the Korean government. However, this would fail, and so the Japanese would put the Korean emperor in imprisonment, and would then put a new government in place. With the permission of the new Korean government, but without a real declaration of war, the Japanese would begin to expel the Chinese from the Korean peninsula. In July of 1894, the Japanese would attack Chinese troops stationed in Seoul and would sink ships carrying reinforcements. China had, by that point, bought many modern weapons. However, their army suffered from corruption, poor training, and bad logistics, causing their army to be much weaker than it could have been. With Seoul secured and war now officially declared, the Japanese would push the Chinese out of Pyongyang in mid-September and would push them back to behind the Yalu River. The Chinese would attempt to reinforce their position along the border. However, their navy would be defeated and they would be forced to seek refuge in Wei Highway. The following month, the Japanese would invade Manchuria by crossing the Yalu River by a handmade pontoon bridge, capturing the Chinese by surprise. Thousands of Chinese people would flee, allowing the Japanese to capture Dadong without much resistance. The Japanese would send an army to pursue the Chinese north, while another army was sent to capture the city of Lushenko, otherwise known as Port Arthur. With Port Arthur now isolated, many more Chinese people would flee from the city, and when the city was captured on the 21st of November, those that were left were massacred by the Japanese. The Japanese would continue to secure their position in Manchuria, and in January of 1895, they would launch an attack on Wei Highway, another important port city which was considered impregnable. Due to a diversion, the Japanese would be able to peacefully land in the Shandong Peninsula, and on Chinese New Year, they would attack Wei Highway. Once again, many Chinese people would flee the city, allowing the Japanese to quickly capture the city in early February. Using the city's artillery, the Japanese would be able to bomb the Chinese Navy, which was stuck in the city's port. On the 12th of February, the Chinese fleet would surrender, now allowing the Japanese to take control of the sea routes to Beijing. The Chinese would attempt to launch a final counterattack in Manchuria, however this would fail and would force the Chinese to surrender. However, just before the treaty was signed, Japan would capture some islands near Taiwan. The treaty that ended the war gave Korea its full independence, albeit under Japanese influence, and granted Japan the Liaodong Peninsula, along with Taiwan. In conclusion, the First Sino-Japanese War was a war between Japan and the Qing dynasty, which would establish Japan as a world power, and would establish the growing weaknesses of the Qing dynasty. Thank you for watching this video on the First Sino-Japanese War.